Good morning, students. Today we are doing Vistas test book. We are doing chapter number 5 Should Wizard Hit Mommy, written by John Updike. John Updike was an American novelist, poet, short story writer, art critic, and literary critic. One of the only three writers to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction more than once. Should Wizard Hit Mommy by John Updike is a story within a story where the father has been narrating the child the same story of a creature named Roger over and over again for the past 2 years with a small variation here and there. In the evenings and for Saturday naps, like today's, Jack told his daughter Jo, a story out of his head. So, Jack is a father. He narrates a story to his daughter Joanne, and he narrates this story in the evenings and for especially the Saturday naps. And today was Saturday. This custom began when she was 2. Now, the custom of storytelling began when John was 2, but itself now nearly 2 years old. So now the storytelling has turned. Joe has turned 4 years old now, and his head felt empty. And Jack did not had any creative idea to tell a story. He did not have what story should I tell, because now it has been years he has been narrating the story. Each new story was a slight variation of a basic tale. A small creature, usually named Roger Fish, Roger Squirrel, Roger Chipmunk, had some problem and went with it to the wise old owl. Now, the story that he has been narrating was the usual same story, but a certain changes he used to do, and especially the name of the creature was always Roger, but sometimes it was fish, squirrel, or chipmunk. And this creature, Roger, had a problem. And to solve his problem, this creature used to go to the wise owl. The owl told him to go to the wizard, and the wizard performed a magic spell that solved the problem, demanding in payment a number of pennies greater than the number that Roger creature had, but in the same breath directing the animal to a place where the extra pennies could be found. So the owl would instruct Roger to go to wizard, so the wizard will solve your problem. Wizard will perform a certain magic to solve Roger's problem, but then he would ask money in return, pennies in return. But then Roger would never have that number with him, so wizard would direct him that you have to go to a certain place where you can get extra pennies. Then Roger was so happy. He played many games with other creatures and went home to his mother just in time to hear the train whistle that brought his daddy home from Boston. And Roger would be very happy as his problem would got solved, and then he is going to go to play with the other creatures. They would enjoy together, and then when it would be dark, Roger would go home as the chow chow train would bring his daddy from Boston, and he would return home. Jack described their supper and the story was over. So Roger would return home in the evening and he would enjoy having an evening meal with the family, and the story would come to an end. Working his way through the scheme was especially fatiguing on Saturdays. Now Jack, who was narrating the story for years, the same very story with a little variation here and there. Now the storytelling had become exhausting for him, and especially on Saturdays. Why? Because Joe never fell asleep in naps anymore. Now Joe does not sleep anymore, and knowing this made the right custom seem futile. So this custom of storytelling became altogether useless, futile. Why? Because the idea of storytelling was that Joe should sleep, but then Joe does not sleep anymore. The little girl, not so little anymore, the bumps her feet made under the covers were halfway down the bed, the big double bed that they let her be in for naps and when she was sick, had at last arranged herself. So this little girl, that is Jo, is not so very big anymore, or not. She's not little anymore. She is turned 4 now. Bumps her feet, that is, hit her feet made under the covers were halfway down. Now Jack notices that Jo had started growing big, and that her legs now stretched halfway down the bed. And this was the double bed that they used to give to her, or she used to utilize one for the Saturday naps and when she was sick. And from the way her fat face, deep in the pillow, shone in the sunlight sifting through the drawn shades, it did not seem fantastic that some magic would occur and she would take her nap like an infant of 2. And with the light coming in from the window over her face that was deep in the pillow, Jack knew she won't be sleeping soon. And the custom seemed futile, especially on Saturday. Her brother, Bobby, was too and already asleep with his bottle. Jack asked, "Who shall the story be about today?" And Joan's brother, Bobby, he's 2 years and he's already asleep with the bottle in his mouth. And then Jack questions, "Who should the story be about today? What story should I narrate you today?" Jack says, "Ask Joan." Roger, Jo squeezed her eyes shut and smiled to be thinking she was thinking. Now, Jo is a small girl of 4 and she squeezes her eyes, pretending that she's thinking of a creature, the story she would like to hear. Her eyes open, her mother's blue, and her eyes, when she opens, it is blue. And the mother's blue means she's altogether a copy and imitation of mother's eyes. Mother's eyes are also blue. "Skunk," she said firmly, and then she announces that she would like to hear the story of Skunk, a new animal that must talk about skunks at nursery school. Having a fresh hero momentarily stirred Jack to creative enthusiasm. Now, Jack realized that Joe might have learned about skunks in her nursery school, and it was a new animal. So, momentarily, even Jack felt of doing something creative, something innovative. He realized that he should think of a beautiful idea to narrate a story for skunk. "All right," he said. "Once upon a time in the deep dark woods there was a tiny little creature by the name of Roger Skunk, and he smelled very bad." Now, Jack started narrating the story, and he narrates the story that it was a deep dark forest, and there lived a creature named Roger Skunk, and he smelled very awful. "Yes," Joe said, and Joe is now becoming a part of this storytelling, and she is announcing, yes, that yes, the storyline is good. He smelled so bad that none of the other little woodland creatures would play with him. So, this Roger Skunk, who was in deep dark forest, he smelled very bad. And because he smelled awful, the other woodland creatures would not play with him. Joe looked at him solemnly, gravely, seriously. He hadn't foreseen this. Now, Jo is a small girl of 4, and her life is playing with friends, being together, enjoying. But then Jo never thought that it could happen, that the creature is left all alone and nobody plays with him. Whenever he would go out to play, Jack continued with zest, remembering certain humiliations of his own childhood, all of the others. So, Jack, when he's narrating the story, he is remembering his childhood days when he had faced humiliations because he smelled bad. So he remembers one and then he continues with the story with all enthusiasm. He says, "Whenever he would go out to play, all of the other tiny animals would cry, 'Oh, oh, here comes Roger's stinky skunk. So, whenever Roger would go to the woodland creatures to play with them, all the other animals would make fun of Roger, announcing that stinky skunk, that is offensive smell, emitting awful smell that Stinky Skunk has come, and they would run away, and Roger Skunk would stand there all alone, and two little round tears would fall from his eyes. And Roger and all the other animals would run away from Roger because he smelled bad, and Roger is left all alone in the jungle, and then the tears would roll from his eyes. The corners of Joe's mouth drooped down and her lower lip bent forward as he traced with the forefinger along the side of her nose the course of one of Roger's skunk's tears. Now, Joe, who was listening to the story, she is picturizing or imagining how Roger might have felt and how the tears might would be falling from his eyes. So she feels the same, and she does what she feels. She is bending her lower lip and she is moving her forefingers to feel the tears of Roger in her eyes. The idea was that she felt bad. Won't he see the owl? She asked in a high and faintly roughened voice. Now Joe knows the story narration that Roger is having a problem and he would go to owl. So she commands the father. She asks that won't Roger go to owl to get the problem solved? And in a roughened voice, in a harsh voice, she says so. Sitting on the bed beside her, Jack felt the covers tug as her legs twitched tensely. So, Jack, who was sitting beside the daughter while he was narrating a story, he notices that Joe felt the covers tug. But tug means to pull. Twitched, switched, that is change position. Tensely, that is in a tense manner. So he notices that how the Joe is getting tensed at the story, and she is involving herself in the story and the cover she's trying to pull. So Jack is enjoying this, that Joe is becoming a part of the story and enjoying.